So we're on Kuf Tes Vav and Aleph. Maskif la Rav Chizda. Rav Huna was of the opinion that when you have only Morar for the first Tibul, even if you hold, at least that's the way the Shagasari understands Rav Huna, that mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, and you yotze your basic mitzvah of Morar with the first Tibul, nevertheless you postpone the bracha until the second Tibul. Maskif lo Rav Chizda liachar mila shemila kreiso himenu chozer u'mevarach alea. Can he postpone the bracha of al achilas marar until he eats the marar later on when he's already filled up his belly with marar in the first tibul? Ella, but rather meikar mevarech aleha bore pri hadoma ve al achilas marar. On the first tibul, he recites two brachos, a birchas hanenim and a birchas mitzvah as well, and he fulfills his mitzvah of marar with that achila. Ulabasof, achil achilas chasa below bracha. So it seems that the second tibul without a bracha, according to Rav Chizda, is only for the purpose of hekera, in order to arouse the curiosity of the children. And yesterday we started an entire discussion about what does Rav Chizda mean by attacking Rav Huna and saying li achar shemila kreiso himenu. And I remember that that I wanted to make a note of where we got up to. Did we finish the Tosfos? Just 1 second, let me just want to remind myself.
No, we're up to Vahashta.
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 In that Tosfos.
In that Tosfos.
Okay, great. Okay, so I remember that we didn't finish it.
Right.
Vahashta. I think Stevie wrote me a note about it. Yeah. Okay. Trouble is you have to remind yourself to read the note. That's the problem. Okay. So we're up to Vahashta. Okay. So let's just want to get myself oriented. I like to use the Biurei HaTosfos here in the back, which is on page Mem. On page Mem, if anybody wants to follow that. Vahashta. Now that we've clarified that even according to Rav Chizda, mitzvahs tzrichas kavana, and dekol elu amoroi savri deboy kavana, right? Every one of the amoroim in our sugya, whether it be Reish Lakish, whether it be Rav Huna, whether it be Rav Chizda, they all agree unanimously, I should say, that you need kavana for a mitzvah. Ustama de Mesader Ashas Samar Hachi. It makes sense to assume that, let's say, Ravina Ravashi, when they organized the Shas, they accepted that view, which is unanimous amongst the Amoraim, that mitzvah tzrichas kavodim, mitzvah lipsok ki Rav Chizda, she'ein mevarchim al achilas mara betibul sheni. Right? I'm trying to figure out where. Oh yeah, it's going to say later on. We didn't get to this yet. That Hilchas HaKavasi de Rav Chizda, which means that we make the bracha on the first tibul, al achilas mara, but not on the second tibul. The e ain't tzrichas kavana. If you're going to hold that he was yotze with the first tibul because mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, then I don't need Hilchas HaKarav Chizda. But pshita de lo yivarech betibul sheni, there's no question about it, and it's it doesn't lend itself to any debate. He would certainly make the bracha on the first tibul because he was yotze with the first tibul. Dafil lo birach betibul rishon nafik bei, right? even if he would leave out a bracha on the first tibul, indicating that he's not interested in the mitzvah, but nevertheless mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, and therefore he was yotze with the first tibul, despite the fact that he doesn't have kavana, he left out the bracha, he's not interested in the mitzvah. And then if he goes ahead and makes a bracha on tibul sheni, after he's already fulfilled his mitzvah with tibul rishon, havi bracha l'vatola. So this is Tosfos' conclusion that the Masader Hashas was compelled to paskin halacha like Rav Chizda because of mitzvah strichas kavanah, which means that he really wasn't yotze b'tibul rishon, but we're going to accept the svara of Rav Chizda liacham mila shemila kreisim, and we're going to require that he make the bracha on the first tibul, even though his mitzvah mara he fulfills with the second tibul. So this part of Tosfos is really, in a sense, a Shas discussion. He's addressing the issue of how do we paskin in this fundamental machlokes, whether it's tzrichas kavana, ain't tzrichas kavana, and he wants to conclude based on our sugim pesachim that mitzvahs tzrichos kavana. Now again, let's keep in mind that everything here in Tosfos is against what we discussed in the Shagas Aryeh. We said in the Shagas Aryeh that even if he was Yotzei, his mitzvah of Mara with the first tibul, nevertheless, at least according to Rav Huna, he would postpone his bracha until the second tibul. And that's why the Shagas Aryeh wanted to reconcile Rav Huna here with Rav Huna in Masechet Sukkah that mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavan. But in Tosfos' frame of reference, if you were yotze with tibul rishon, ge'endik d'maisa, the story is over, finito. There's no question that there's no room for a bracha on tibul sheni. He was already yotze his mitzvah. Whereas the Shagas Aryeh opens the floodgates to the possibility that even after I was Mekayim the mitzvah, I could still make the bracha. And over l'asiyosan is only l'chatchila, but b'di'eved, even li'achar asiyosan, I could still make the bracha. Tosfos rejects this outright. So even Rav Huna is based on the fact that mitzvahs tzrichos kavan, he wasn't yotze his mitzvah mar with the first tibul, and therefore he makes the bracha on the second tibul. And that's what Tosfos had said earlier, that Rav Chizda could have had a much more fundamental objection to Rav Huna if Rav Huna actually held mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, because then behedja he should have said explicitly keva the nafak b'tibul rishon, if he fulfills the mitzvah with the first tibul because mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, in yavarach b'tibul sheni havi bracha l'vatol. The Tosfos doesn't hedge or hoa about this premise. This is a principle and an assumption that Tosfos is not willing to even question, that if mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavan and he was yotze with the first tibul, there's no possibility that the bracha would come on the second tibul. And that's what Rav Chizda should have said to Rav Huna, except that Rav Huna holds mitzvahs tzrichas kavan. Oh, so my apologies. There's a small Tosfos that we skipped, or maybe we didn't skip it, but at least I forgot about it. And that is Tosfos on Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis. If you take a look, there's a small 2-line Tosfos that you could very easily overlook. Amar Rav Huna. So let's just look at that Tosfos for a second. Rav Huna Sava Kreish Lakish the Boy Kavana. So the Tosfos is outright explicit about the fact that Rav Huna holds mitzvah tzrichas kavana, and therefore afilu islay shar yirakos ovid b'mar sheni tibulo. Well, what is he adding here? I didn't catch. What's hafilu islay sha'ar yirakos? Oh, I see. Sorry, I didn't read it properly. He's saying that, let's say he has not only chazeres in his closet, but he also has sha'ar yirakos. So he has two options. And Tosfos is saying that we don't have to discourage him from using chazeres for the first tibul if he so desires, because although he has other possibilities, like he has karpas in his closet, but nevertheless, since mitzvah tzrichas kavana, he's not going to be yotzei with the first tibul, because he doesn't have kavana in the first tibul for an achilas maror, as we saw already Reish Lakish, and therefore he will recite the bracha on the second tibul, the bracha of al achilas maror, he will recite on the second tibul. So again, why does Rav Chisda reject Rav Huna? So what we said yesterday was that according to Rav Chisda, he makes the bracha on the Maisa mitzvah. And that's called Mila Kreso. So it looks very strange that he's eating mar and he's not making a bracha on the mar. Now, the reason he's not making a bracha on the mar is because mitzvah tzrichas kavana, and he doesn't have kavana to be yotzei with mar on the first tibul. He wants to gain mar in the second tibul. But we suggested that since he had the Maisa mitzvah of Achilus Mar in the first tibul, therefore he should make the bracha before the first tibul. Which is really interesting because the Gemara passes like Rav Chisda, but I don't know anybody who makes al Achilus Mar on the first tibul. But let's just finish up the second Tosfos. The less hilchos hakavasei davur de Shmuel de islay beperek ra'u bezdin. The mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. De ka'omar avur de Shmuel says bekafu ve'achal matzah yatsa mukila the Kafu Parsiim. So he was forced by the Nachrim to eat matzah. And he was Yotze. That's because Havud Shmuel holds mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. We're not going to paskin like Shmuel, like Havud Shmuel, because Aram Oroim all agree unanimously that mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. V'hasam lo mayri me achlo below miskaven. So what's he saying now, Tosfos? The Gemara there in Pesachim, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah does not quote our Gemara in Pesachim as a proof that mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. We had a brisa on Daf Kuf Yud Dalet in Beis that ochlo below miskaven yotza. So l'chora, the Gemara there in Rosh Hashanah should have quoted this brisa as a proof that mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, which would support Avud Shmuel in the case of kavu lechal matzah. And he says, why doesn't the Gemara do that? Mishum de legabi achila, there we're going to say mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. But v'lo be'inan kavana kuli hai kamo b'tfila u'b'tkiyah. So I guess the Sugi Rosh Hashanah is talking about Tokei L'shir, where he blew the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, but not L'shem mitzvah, so he didn't have kavanah L'shem mitzvah. And you cannot prove that he could be Yotzei the mitzvah shofar without kavanah from the fact that he could eat the maror without kavanah. So Tos says, "Mishum hachi nami lo maisi hacha braisos the hustle." Why doesn't our Gemara bring a raya that what? I guess he's saying that in Rosh Hashanah it says Tokei Shalol L'Shem Mitzvah Lo Yatsa, and that should bring a raya. That should bring a raya that Mitzvah Tzrichas Kavana. So our Gemara should have quoted that brisa from Tokei Shalol L'Shem Mitzvah. The boy kavana, l'gabi tfilu tkiya boy kavana tfei mi achilo kidduprecious. Wow. It's interesting because until this Tosas, we always differentiated black and white, either mitzvah srichas kavana or ein srichas kavana. And either way, it's across the board. We never have seen or encountered until this point a distinction between one mitzvah and another. In other words, we never subdivided mitzvahs into different categories. One category requires kavanah, one category does not require kavanah. It was always all or nothing. But now Tosfos is suggesting that it's not all or nothing. That what? That in achila we don't require kavanah, whereas in tkiya and tefillah we do require kavanah. So even if our Gemara, as we saw in the Bryce on Kuf Yudal and Beis, assumes that you don't need kavanah for achila, that would not be a proof against the halach in Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara that says Tokeh Shalol L'Shem Mitzvah Lo Yotza. Because Shalol L'Shem Mitzvah means he's lacking in kavanah. And on the other hand, the Gemara there in Rosh Hashanah is not going to prove that mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah from achila. Because it could be that shofar needs kavanah even if achila does not need kavanah. So I think what's going on here in Tosfos is that the issue of whether or not mitzvah tzrichas kavanah hinges on the Maisa mitzvah. How do you set up a Maisa mitzvah? Can you set up a Maisa mitzvah and give it the status of a Maisa mitzvah al pidin, even in the absence of kavanah l'shem mitzvah? And in that context, Tosfos wants to differentiate between achila and kol shofar. In the case of achila, you have an objective Maisa achila, and that could be considered a Maisa mitzvah. And why is that? Because in achila, his body gets hana. And that's a significant reality that you can't deny. You know, whether he has kavanah in his mind or not, but his body is nene. But shofar is all about hearing the kol shofar. It's not a hanas haguf. It's only about, wanting to reach out to the Ribono Shel Olam, through the kol shofar, which goes up on high. And it's like tefillah. And tefillah, you have no physical action of hanas haguf that could generate a certain chashivus to a Maisa mitzvah, even in the absence of kavanah. So what makes the Maisa mitzvah of tefillah or of shofar into a Maisa mitzvah? It's kavanah. So that's what we have over here. Now, the Gemara says, in the name of Rav Chizda, that Meikara on Tivul Rishon, he makes 2 brachos. Ulabasof, meaning in Tivul Sheni, Achil Achilas Chasa below bracha. Now, below bracha sounds like he doesn't even make a bar pri adama. So Tosfos says that's for hadar achel chasa. V'nireh di ein tzarich levarich bar pri adama al amar sha'ocha b'tivul sheni afal gav da goda v'hefsek kidapreciously el. V'im kein lo miftar bebracha shel tibul arishon. Mikol makom kevan she'ochel samor li'achar shebirech ala matzah birchas hamotzi potroson. Tahavile kidvar maboim b'toch hasuda machmas hasuda. So why is this considered machmas hasuda? I mean, in fact, in truth, he's only eating it because of the mitzvah of mora. Shari yerokos gorin halev. I guess he's saying every single yerek, even if it's bitter herbs, is ma'ore the tavas hamachal. So he's going to eat more than he would have eaten if he hadn't had vegetables. The Karile Nami Lemora Parperes Hapas. Our Mishnah describes Mora as Parperes Hapas. How do you translate the word Parperes? I guess it's an accompaniment or something secondary. I want to see if he has a translation of the word Parperes. You don't have an art school, do you, Steve? No. My friend Ben Wittenberg, you know Ben? He has access to an English translation of the Gemara online, and it's a translation on a very high level from Rabbi Steinsaltz. And he gets it through a site, I think it's called Sifrayo or something along that line. Sifaria. He told me once he would teach me how to get it, but well, maybe Tosfos will help us out here. He says, "V'korile nami lemora parperes hapas, v'chein omar v'ketzad mevorchim birech al hapas poter es haparperes." Oh, he's going to help us. Maybe we don't even need an English translation. He says, "What is parperes? Hainu dvarim hamamshichim ha'achila." I guess you'd call it like an appetizer. Well, what does the word appetizer mean? Does it mean it stimulates your appetite and you want to eat more? It's funny because I just noticed lately in my life that sometimes I'm not in the mood to eat, but when I start eating, I get hungry, so to speak. I guess that's the purpose of this parperes hapas. Dvarim hamamshichim ha'achila kigon. He gives some examples. Dogim ktanim. I guess he's referring to sardines or something like that. Utmarim. So if you eat dates, it somehow arouses your appetite. V'yerokos. Even more, I guess. That's really strange. Sounds almost Greek. You know, the ancient Greeks. Ulekach, poteres aparperes, meaning the hamotzi on the pas, patus of the parperes, lefisha bolit sorech, shaydekach ochel yosef. Okay. So let's see. We'll make a note that we got to ulekach. Where do we get up to? Ulekach. What's tomorrow? Tomorrow's Wednesday, right? So let's see where we got up to here. Ulekach. Where's Ulekach? Ulekach.